The tears streaked down Wilhelmina Hayes' pale cheeks as she pressed her forehead against the rough wooden wall of Cottonwood Springs Station, her shoulders trembling with each silent sob. The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly on the small outpost that served as both stagecoach stop and telegraph office. Her gloved hand clutched a crumpled telegram that had destroyed her last remaining hope. Behind her, the sounds of the bustling frontier town continued, unabated horses nickering, men shouting prices at the nearby trading post, the distant piano from the saloon playing a cheerful tune that only deepened her despair. She didn't notice the tall figure approaching until his shadow fell across her, providing momentary relief from the relentless sun. "Madam," the voice was deep, tinged with a slight southern drawl, "forgive my intrusion, but no lady should be shedding tears alone in this heat." Wilhelmina hastily wiped her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable state. She turned to face the stranger, finding herself looking up at a man whose weathered face spoke of years under the harsh western sun. His eyes, however, held a gentleness that contrasted with his rugged appearance. He wore a dust-covered duster over practical riding clothes, and the Stetson on his head was pushed back slightly, revealing sun-lightened brown hair. "I apologize for the display," she said, her voice still unsteady. "I've just received some difficult news." The man's eyes flickered to the telegram in her hand. "Bad news travels fast out here." He removed his hat, revealing the full extent of his sun-weathered face. "Quincy Reed at your service." Wilhelmina straightened her posture, trying to regain some composure. Her traveling dress, once elegant when she departed Boston 3 weeks ago, was now crumpled and stained from the journey. "Wilhelmina Hayes," she replied, offering a slight curtsy out of habit, "though most call me Willa." Quincy's lips curved into a smile that softened his features. "Miss Hayes, might I ask where you're headed? The next stage isn't due until tomorrow morning." The question brought fresh tears to her eyes. "That's precisely my predicament, Mr. Reed. I was to meet my fiancé in Santa Fe. He came west 6 months ago to establish a law practice. But this," she held up the telegram, "this informs me that he has married another, someone more, suited to frontier life, apparently." Quincy's expression darkened. "A man who'd leave a lady stranded halfway across the country isn't worth those tears, Miss Hayes." "It's not him I'm crying for," Willa said with sudden fire. "It's my situation. I've spent nearly every penny I had on this journey. I have no home to return to in Boston. My parents are gone, and the family home was sold to pay debts. I have nowhere to go and barely enough money for a room tonight, let alone passage back east." The cowboy was silent for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made Willa uncomfortable. Finally, he placed his hat back on his head and said the words that would change everything. "Your journey ends with me, Miss Hayes." Willa took a step back, her eyes widening. "I beg your pardon." "Not like that," Quincy quickly amended, his tanned face coloring slightly. "I own a cattle ranch about 20 miles outside of town. Been looking for a proper housekeeper since my last one left to marry a shopkeeper in Tucson. It's respectable work with a private room and good wages, at least until you decide what you want to do." Willa's mind raced. The proposition seemed both outlandish and possibly inappropriate, yet there was something reassuringly straightforward about the man's demeanor. "I don't know the first thing about keeping house on a ranch, Mr. Reed. Can you cook? Basic meals, yes. Can you read and write? Of course. Then you're already more qualified than half the territory." He smiled again, this time revealing a small gap between his front teeth that gave his otherwise stern face a boyish quality. "I've got 3 ranch hands who'd appreciate a meal that isn't burnt to a crisp. The house isn't fancy, but it's solid, and no one will bother you there." Willa glanced down at the telegram once more. What choice did she have? Her former fiancé, had left her with nothing but a broken promise and an uncertain future. "How do I know I can trust you, Mr. Reed?" "We've only just met." Quincy nodded as if he'd expected the question. "Sheriff Dawson over there knows me well enough." He pointed to a graying man with a silver star pinned to his vest who was smoking a pipe outside the town's modest jailhouse. You're welcome to ask about my character. Or speak with Mrs. Thornton at the general store. She supplies my ranch and has known me for 15 years. Willa considered her options. She could spend her last dollars on a room at the boarding house and then what? Become destitute in a town where she knew no one. Or she could accept this unexpected opportunity and at least have time to formulate a proper plan. I would need to speak with the sheriff, she said finally, and Mrs. Thornton as well, of course, Quincy agreed readily. I have some supplies to purchase anyway. Shall we meet back here in an hour? Willa nodded, still uncertain but feeling the first flicker of hope since opening that devastating telegram. An hour later, Willa's impressions of Quincy Reed had been confirmed by both the sheriff. Honest as the day is long, that one. Built that ranch from nothing. And Mrs. Thornton, a matronly woman who had practically gushed about the rancher's integrity. That man once rode 15 miles in a thunderstorm to bring medicine for my boy when he had the fever, never asked for a thing in return. When Quincy returned, leading a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 well-kept horses, Willa had made her decision. I accept your offer, Mr. Reed, she said, clutching her small traveling case. Though I warn you, my cooking skills are limited to what I learned from our cook in Boston. As long as it's edible, it'll be an improvement, Quincy replied, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. We should get moving if we want to reach the ranch before dark. As they left Cottonwood Springs behind, Willa felt a strange mixture of trepidation and relief. The landscape around them was unlike anything she'd ever seen, vast expanses of scrubland dotted with cacti and distant mesas rising like sentinels against the azure sky. It was beautiful in its harshness, so different from the manicured gardens and crowded streets of Boston. How did you come to own a ranch out here? She asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Quincy's hands remained steady on the reins as he answered. Came west after the war between the states. Wasn't much left for me in Tennessee. Worked as a ranch hand for years, saved every penny. When old man Hollister decided to sell his place and move to California, I had just enough to buy it. That was 7 years ago. And you've been alone all this time, a shadow passed over his face. Had a wife once, Sarah. She died in childbirth 4 years ago along with our son. I'm so sorry, Willa said softly, instantly regretting her question. Life out here is hard, Quincy said simply, but it has its rewards too. As if to illustrate his point, a red-tailed hawk soared overhead, its wings spread wide against the endless blue sky. Willa watched it glide effortlessly on the thermal currents, free in a way she'd never experienced. What about you? Quincy asked. What brought a Boston lady all the way out here to marry a man who clearly didn't deserve her? Willa sighed. Thomas and I grew up together. Our families expected us to marry. When his law practice in Boston faltered, he decided to seek opportunity in the West. I was to join him once he was established. She twisted the small silver ring on her finger, not an engagement ring, but a gift from her mother that she treasured. I suppose I should be grateful he sent the telegram before I arrived rather than after. Small mercies, Quincy agreed. The journey continued as the afternoon sun began its descent. Quincy pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the territory. He spoke of the Apache who still roamed parts of the land, the cavalry outpost 30 miles to the south, and the silver mine that had brought a brief boom to the region before playing out 2 years prior. As dusk approached, they crested a small rise, and Quincy pulled the wagon to a halt. There it is, he said, gesturing ahead. Reed Ranch. In the valley below, Willa could make out a substantial log house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and a large corral where cattle and horses grazed. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees whose leaves shimmered in the evening breeze. It's lovely, she said, genuinely impressed by the neatness of the place. Quincy's chest seemed to swell slightly with pride. It's not much compared to what you're used to, but it's home. As they approached, 3 men emerged from what appeared to be a bunkhouse. They watched the wagon with evident curiosity. My ranch hands, Quincy explained. Miguel Ortiz has been with me the longest. Best horse trainer in the territory. The younger one is Billy Hawkins, good with cattle but still green, and the tall fellow is Joseph White, half Cherokee and the best tracker you'll ever meet. The men tipped their hats respectfully as Quincy introduced Willa as the new housekeeper. If they were surprised by her fine clothes or Eastern accent, they hid it well. Miss Hayes will be preparing meals starting tomorrow, Quincy informed them, so you can stop drawing lots to see who has to cook. This announcement was met with visible relief from all three men. "Come on," Quincy said to Willa, "I'll show you the house." The ranch house was larger than it had appeared from a distance. Built of sturdy logs with a stone foundation, it featured a central living area with a massive stone fireplace, a kitchen with an iron stove and pump sink, a small study lined with books that surprised Willa, and 3 bedrooms off a short hallway. "This will be your room," Quincy said, opening a door to reveal a simple but clean space with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small dresser. A braided rug covered part of the wooden floor, and lace curtains somewhat incongruous with the rest of the rustic decor hung at the single window. "Sarah made those," Quincy said, noticing Willa's gaze on the curtains. "Never had the heart to take them down." "They're beautiful," Willa said softly. "Well, I'll let you get settled," Quincy said, suddenly seeming uncomfortable in the small space. "There's a trunk at the foot of the bed with some of Sarah's things. You're welcome to use whatever fits. Didn't seem right to throw them away, but no use letting them go to waste either." Before Willa could respond, he continued, "Breakfast is usually at sunrise. The men like coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in and enough food to tide them over till midday. I'll show you around the kitchen in the morning." With that, he retreated, leaving Willa alone in the room that would now be hers. She sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day washing over her. Yesterday, she had been Wilhelmina Hayes, soon-to-be wife of a frontier lawyer. Today, she was a housekeeper on a cattle ranch employed by a man she'd just met. She opened the trunk cautiously, feeling slightly intrusive. Inside were several practical dresses, aprons, a pair of sturdy boots, and undergarments, all simple but well made. There was also a small wooden box containing a hairbrush, a hand mirror, and a cameo brooch. Willa closed the box quickly, not wanting to pry further into the personal effects of Quincy's late wife. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Willa listened to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, the occasional lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses, and the constant chorus of cicadas and frogs from the creek. It was so different from the street noises of Boston or even the bustle of the small hotel in Cottonwood Springs. Sleep came surprisingly easily, and with it, the first dreamless night she'd had since beginning her journey west. Morning arrived with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee brewing. Willa dressed quickly in one of Sarah's simpler dresses, which fit well enough though it was a bit short at the ankles. She pinned her brown hair into a practical bun and made her way to the kitchen. Quincy was already there, pouring coffee into a large enamel pot. He glanced up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's ready. Figured you might need that before tackling breakfast." "Thank you," Willa said, accepting the cup he offered. The coffee was indeed strong, but the bitter taste was welcome after her long journey. "What do the men usually have for breakfast?" "Whatever's available," Quincy said with a shrug. "Eggs from the henhouse out back, bacon or salt pork, biscuits if anyone can manage them." Willa rolled up her sleeves. "Well, I suppose I should get started then." The next hour was a flurry of activity as Willa familiarized herself with the kitchen. The stove was temperamental, running hotter than she was accustomed to, but she managed to cook a respectable breakfast of fried eggs, bacon, and cornbread that she found surprisingly easy to make with the ingredients at hand. The ranch hands filed in just as she was setting the food on the table. They ate with appreciative gusto, complimenting her cooking between mouthfuls. "Best meal I've had in months, Miss Hayes," Billy declared, reaching for another piece of cornbread. "It's only eggs and bacon," Willa said, embarrassed by the praise. "You haven't tasted Billy's eggs," Miguel replied with a grin. "Like leather with yellow paint." The men laughed, and even Quincy's stern expression softened into something approaching a smile. After breakfast, the men departed for their daily tasks, and Quincy lingered to explain Willa's duties. Besides cooking, she would be responsible for keeping the house clean, doing the laundry once a week, and managing the small vegetable garden behind the house. "I'll leave you to it," he said finally. "I need to check the north pasture today. We've had trouble with coyotes getting at the calves." Alone in the house, Willa set about exploring her new domain more thoroughly. The pantry was well stocked with basics: flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, and preserves. A trapdoor in the kitchen floor led to a small root cellar where potatoes, onions, and apples were stored. Outside, the garden yielded carrots, radishes, and lettuce ready for picking. By midday, Willa had swept the entire house, made a stew for the evening meal, and collected eggs from the henhouse. The physical labor was unfamiliar but not unwelcome. It kept her mind from dwelling on her circumstances. The routine established itself quickly over the next few days. Willa would rise early to prepare breakfast, tend to the house and garden during the day, and have supper ready by the time the men returned from their work. Quincy was often absent from dawn until dusk, checking cattle, fixing fences, or riding into town for supplies. When he was present, he was unfailingly polite but distant, retreating to his study in the evenings with account books or one of the many volumes from his surprisingly extensive library. Willa found herself curious about this contradiction: a cowboy who reads Shakespeare and Thoreau by lamplight. A week into her stay, Willa was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Quincy riding in, his horse at a canter. He dismounted smoothly and approached, his expression serious. "We've got company coming," he announced without preamble. "Army patrol's been tracking a band of Apache who raided the Henderson place 2 days ago. Captain Lewis and 4 of his men will be staying the night." Willa's eyes widened. "Tonight, but I haven't prepared anything suitable for guests." "They'll be grateful for whatever you can provide," Quincy assured her. "They've been in the saddle for 3 days straight." Willa hurried back to the kitchen, mentally cataloging the available ingredients. There was a ham she'd been saving, plenty of potatoes, and she could make biscuits. The garden had yielded enough green beans for a side dish. It would have to do. The soldiers arrived as the sun was setting 5 dust-covered men whose weariness was evident in the slump of their shoulders. Captain Lewis, a tall man with a neatly trimmed mustache, thanked Quincy for the hospitality. "We've been following their trail since Sweetwater Creek," he explained over supper. "Lost it near the canyon this afternoon. They're headed for the mountains, most likely." "Any casualties at the Henderson place?" Quincy asked. The captain nodded grimly. "Tom Henderson was killed. His wife and daughter managed to hide in the root cellar. They took 2 horses and some supplies." Willa listened silently as she served the meal, her heart heavy at the thought of the Henderson family's loss. The West's dangers, which had seemed abstract in Boston, were suddenly very real. After the meal, which the soldiers praised effusively, the men gathered on the porch to smoke while Willa cleared the table. Through the open window, she could hear their conversation drift in fragments. "Been quiet for months. Treaty means nothing when they're hungry. Cavalry stretched too thin." Later, as she prepared coffee, Captain Lewis entered the kitchen. "Miss Hayes, I wanted to thank you personally for the excellent meal. It's rare to have such fine cooking on patrol." "You're very welcome, Captain," Willa replied, pouring a cup for him. "Though I'm still learning my way around a Western kitchen." "Quincy mentioned you're from Boston. That's quite a change." "Yes, it has been educational," the captain smiled. "Reed's a good man, best rancher in these parts. Respected by everyone, even the Apache before the troubles started up again." Oh, this was new information to Willa. He learned their language, traded fairly with them. There was a time when this ranch was considered neutral ground. The captain sighed. "Times change, though. Drought and broken promises have made enemies of former friends." The soldiers departed at dawn the following day, leaving the ranch quieter than usual. Quincy seemed preoccupied, spending more time checking the property boundaries and instructing the hands to keep the cattle closer to the ranch house. "Are you worried about the Apache?" Willa asked that evening as she served him coffee in his study. Quincy looked up from his ledger, seeming surprised by her question or perhaps her perception. Worried, no. Cautious, yes. The band that hit the Henderson place is led by a warrior called Black Knife. He used to trade with me years ago. If he's raiding settlements now, things have gotten desperate on the reservation. The captain said you speak their language. Quincy nodded. Some, enough to trade and avoid misunderstandings. You respect them, Willa observed. I respect anyone who fights for their home and family, Quincy replied. Even when I disagree with their methods, he closed his ledger. But that's enough talk of trouble. Tell me, Miss Hayes, are you settling in all right? Is there anything you need? The sudden change of subject caught Willa off guard. I'm managing well enough, thank you. Everyone has been very kind. Good, Quincy said, then hesitated before adding, I was thinking of riding into town on Saturday. There's a social at the church. Might be nice for you to meet some of the local ladies. Willa felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the invitation. I'd like that very much, Mr. Reed. Saturday arrived clear and warm. Willa spent extra time with her appearance, washing her hair and letting it dry in the sun before pinning it into a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. She chose the best of Sarah's dresses, a blue calico with white trim that fit her almost perfectly. When she emerged from her room, Quincy was waiting in the main room, dressed in what was clearly his Sunday best, a clean black coat over a white shirt, his usual dusty Stetson replaced by a newer one. He looked different, somehow more approachable without the layer of trail dust that usually covered him. You look very nice, Miss Hayes, he said, his eyes quickly moving away from her as if embarrassed by his own observation. Thank you, Mr. Reed, as do you. The wagon ride to town was pleasant, with Quincy pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's early days. Willa found herself laughing at his dry observations about the characters who had passed through the territory. See that bluff there, he said, pointing to a distinctive rock formation. Legend has it that a Spanish conquistador buried a chest of gold somewhere beneath it. Every few years, some fool gets it in his head to dig up the whole area looking for it. Have you ever been tempted to look? Willa asked. Quincy chuckled. Got enough to do keeping the ranch going without chasing fairy tales. Besides, any gold that might have been there was probably found by the Apache long ago. The church social was being held in the yard behind Cottonwood Springs' small white clapboard church. Tables laden with food formed a U-shape around an open area where several couples were already dancing to the music provided by a fiddler and a man with a banjo. Mrs. Thornton from the general store spotted them immediately and hurried over. Quincy Reed, as I live and breathe. We haven't seen you at a social in over a year. She turned to Willa with a warm smile. And Miss Hayes, how wonderful to see you again. How are you finding ranch life? It's been quite an adjustment, but a welcome one, Willa replied honestly. Well, come along, Mrs. Thornton said, taking Willa's arm. There are several people you simply must meet. Before she knew it, Willa was being introduced to a dizzying array of Cottonwood Springs residents, the blacksmith's wife, the new schoolteacher, the banker's daughter, and a half-dozen ranchers' wives and daughters. Everyone was curious about the Boston lady who was now keeping house for the reclusive Quincy Reed. How did you ever convince him to attend? Whispered Martha Jenkins, wife of the local doctor. He hasn't been social since Sarah passed. I didn't do anything, Willa protested. He invited me. Martha exchanged a meaningful look with Mrs. Thornton. Did he now? Interesting. Before Willa could question what they found so interesting, the music changed to a livelier tune and several men approached to ask ladies to dance. To Willa's surprise, Quincy appeared at her side. Would you care to dance, Miss Hayes? He asked formally. I'd be delighted, Mr. Reed, she replied, taking his offered arm. Quincy proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her smoothly through the steps of the reel. His hand at her waist was firm but gentle, and Willa found herself more aware of his presence than she had been before. There was a grace to his movements that belied his usual frontier roughness. As they moved through the figures of the dance, Willa caught several people watching them with obvious interest. When the music ended, Quincy led her to the refreshment table and procured 2 cups of punch. Everyone is staring at us, Willa murmured, accepting the cup. It's not often they see a beautiful woman from the east, Quincy replied, then looked momentarily flustered, as if he hadn't meant to voice that thought. Before Willa could respond to the unexpected compliment, Sheriff Dawson approached, his expression serious. "Reed, got a minute?" he asked, nodding respectfully to Willa. Quincy excused himself and moved a few paces away with the sheriff. Though Willa couldn't hear their conversation, she could see the change in Quincy's posture, a new tension in his shoulders, a gravity in his expression. When he returned, the earlier lightness was gone from his manner. "We should head back to the ranch," he said quietly. "Is something wrong?" Willa asked as they walked to the wagon. Quincy waited until they were seated and moving away from town before answering. "The Wilcox place was hit last night, same band of Apache that got the Hendersons, armies organizing a larger patrol." "Were there casualties?" Willa asked, dreading the answer. "No, thankfully, the Wilcoxes were in town for the social." His hands tightened on the reins. "But it means they're moving through our area. We need to be careful." The pleasant mood of the social evaporated, replaced by a tense vigilance. Quincy pushed the horses harder than usual, clearly anxious to return to the ranch before dark. They arrived to find Miguel, Joseph, and Billy already on alert, rifles at the ready. Quincy quickly filled them in on the news from town. "Joseph, you take first watch. Billy, you're next, then Miguel. I'll take the dawn shift," Quincy ordered. "Keep the horses in the corral tonight, not the pasture." Turning to Willa, his expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry about cutting the social short." "There's no need to apologize," she assured him. "Safety must come first." That night, Willa found sleep elusive. Every sound from outside the creak of the windmill, the rustle of leaves, the occasional call of a night bird made her start. Eventually, she rose and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, making her way to the kitchen for a cup of water. She was surprised to find Quincy seated at the table, a rifle across his knees, staring out the window at the moonlit yard. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without turning. "No," Willa admitted. "I keep thinking about the Wilcoxes and the Hendersons." Quincy sighed heavily. "It's a hard country, Miss Hayes, beautiful but unforgiving." "Do you regret coming west?" she asked, taking a seat across from him. He considered the question for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "Despite everything, no, this land gets into your blood, becomes part of you." He looked at her directly, his eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. "What about you? Do you regret coming west, even with how things turned out?" Willa thought about Boston, about the life she'd left behind, the predictable routine, the societal expectations, the narrow path laid out for her as a proper lady. Then she thought about the past 2 weeks, the vast open skies, the satisfaction of hard work, the simple pleasures of a meal shared with people who appreciated it. "No," she said softly, "I don't regret it." Something shifted in Quincy's expression, a softening, a recognition. For a moment, they simply looked at each other in the dim light, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The moment was broken by a sharp whistle from outside, a signal from Joseph on watch. Quincy was on his feet instantly, moving to the door with the rifle ready. "Stay inside," he ordered, his voice hard again. Willa's heart pounded as she heard low voices outside, then Quincy's louder response. After what seemed an eternity, he returned, his face grim. "Joseph spotted riders about a mile out. Moving away from us, thankfully, but we'll keep double watches tonight." Willa nodded, suddenly very aware of how isolated the ranch was, how vulnerable despite the men standing guard. "You should try to get some rest," Quincy said, his voice gentler now. "Dawn's not far off." The night passed without incident, but the next day brought news that chilled Willa's blood. A rider from town arrived mid-morning with word that the cavalry patrol, including Captain Lewis, had been ambushed in the canyon. 3 soldiers were dead and the captain himself wounded. Quincy called his men together immediately. "Miguel, ride to the north range and bring in any cattle you find. Joseph, check the south pasture. Billy, you stay close to the house. I'm going to ride the perimeter, make sure our boundaries are secure." As the men dispersed to their tasks, Quincy turned to Willa. "Stay inside today, keep the doors locked. There's a shotgun in my bedroom if you need it." "You think they might come here?" Willa asked, unable to keep the fear from her voice. Quincy's expression was somber. I don't think Black Knife would target this ranch. We have history, but I can't be sure who's riding with him or how desperate they've become. After he rode out, Willa tried to occupy herself with normal tasks needing bread, sweeping floors, mending a torn shirt of Billy's. But her mind kept returning to the dangers lurking beyond the ranch's boundaries. By mid-afternoon, her nerves were stretched taut as fiddle strings. A sound from the front of the house made her freeze hoofbeats, but irregular, as if the horse was injured or being ridden hard. She moved cautiously to the window and peered out. It was Quincy, slumped over his horse's neck, one hand pressed to his side. Even from a distance, Willa could see the dark stain spreading across his shirt. She threw open the door and ran to him as he half fell, half dismounted from his horse. What happened? She gasped, supporting him as best she could as he staggered toward the house. Ran into scouting party, he managed through gritted teeth. Arrow got lucky. Inside, she helped him to the sofa and quickly unbuttoned his shirt to reveal an ugly wound in his left side where an arrow had grazed him deeply, leaving a furrow of torn flesh. Where's Billy? Quincy asked, his breathing labored. Checking the south fence line, he should be back soon. Willa was already gathering clean cloths and water. We need to clean this before infection sets in. Quincy nodded, his face pale beneath his tan. Medicine, cabinet in my room, bottle of whiskey under the bed. Willa worked quickly, cleaning the wound as gently as possible while Quincy drank from the whiskey bottle, his jaw clenched against the pain. The gash was deep, but clean the arrow had sliced through flesh without lodging in it. You're fortunate, she said, applying a salve of herbs she found in the medicine cabinet. A few inches to the right and it would have been much worse. Wouldn't call it luck, Quincy grunted. More like poor aim on their part. Despite his attempt at humor, Willa could see he was in significant pain. She bound the wound with clean bandages, her hands steady despite her racing heart. You need rest, she said firmly, and no riding for at least a few days. Quincy started to protest, but a wave of dizziness silenced him. He allowed Willa to help him to his bedroom, where he sank onto the bed with a barely suppressed groan. The men need to know, he said, his voice weaker now. When Billy returns, I'll tell him everything, Willa promised. Now rest. She sat with him until he drifted into an uneasy sleep, then returned to the kitchen to prepare broth and continue her anxious watch for Billy's return. The young ranch hand arrived an hour later, alarmed to find Quincy injured and even more disturbed by his account of encountering Apache scouts. They've never come this close to the ranch before, he said, pacing the kitchen while Willa prepared a tray for Quincy. What changed? Desperation, perhaps, Willa suggested, remembering Quincy's words about broken treaties and drought, or they no longer see Mr. Reed as an ally. Billy shook his head. We need to get word to Miguel and Joseph. They're still out there. Go, Willa said decisively. I can manage here. Mr. Reed is sleeping now, and I know how to use the shotgun if necessary. After Billy departed, Willa returned to Quincy's bedside with broth and fresh water. He was awake, his eyes clearer though pain still lined his face. Billy's gone to warn the others, she told him, helping him sit up enough to take some broth. You should have kept him here, Quincy said, though without real anger. Safer with more guns. Your men needed to know the danger, Willa replied firmly. Besides, I'm not entirely helpless. A ghost of a smile touched Quincy's lips. No, I don't suppose you are, Miss Hayes. As night fell, Willa kept vigil, dividing her time between checking on Quincy and watching the approaches to the ranch from the windows. The hours stretched endlessly, each sound from outside sending a fresh surge of anxiety through her. Shortly after midnight, Quincy's fever began to rise. Willa bathed his face with cool cloths, murmuring reassurances as he shifted restlessly, sometimes speaking words she couldn't understand, perhaps in the Apache language he knew. In one lucid moment, he grasped her hand. Willa, he said, using her familiar name for the first time, if I don't. If things go badly. Don't, she interrupted. You'll be fine. The wound is clean and you're strong. Listen, he insisted, in my desk, papers, deed to the ranch, some money. If I don't make it, it's yours, all of it. Willa stared at him, stunned. Why would you do that? You hardly know me. Quincy's eyes held hers, feverish but determined. Know enough. Know you've got grit, determination. This place needs that. Before she could respond, his eyes drifted closed again, his breathing becoming more labored. Willa spent the night fighting his fever, alternating between cool compresses and spoonfuls of water mixed with willow bark tea. By dawn, the crisis had passed. Quincy's breathing was easier, and his skin, though still warm, no longer burned with the dangerous heat of the previous hours. She was dozing in a chair beside his bed when the sound of hoofbeats jerked her awake. Moving quickly to the window, she saw Miguel and Joseph riding in, with Billy just behind them. Relief flooded through her as she went to meet them. All three men looked exhausted but unharmed. We rode the boundaries all night, Miguel reported. No sign of Apache anywhere near the ranch. How's the boss? Joseph asked, dismounting with fluid grace. The fever broke a few hours ago, Willa told them. He's sleeping now. You look like you could use some rest yourself, Miss Hayes, Billy observed. We can keep watch now. Willa nodded gratefully and retreated to her room, where she fell into an exhausted sleep despite the bright morning sunlight streaming through the window. When she woke, the sun was already westering. She hurried to check on Quincy, finding him propped up in bed, looking weak but alert, with Joseph seated nearby. There she is, Quincy said, his voice stronger than she expected. The angel of mercy herself. Joseph tactfully excused himself, leaving them alone. How are you feeling? Willa asked, automatically checking Quincy's forehead for fever. Like I've been kicked by a mule, he admitted, but alive thanks to you. I only did what anyone would do. No, Quincy said with quiet certainty. Not anyone. You showed courage when many would have panicked. Willa felt her cheeks warm at his praise. I was terrified, she confessed, but there wasn't time to indulge in fear. That's what courage is, Quincy said, acting despite fear, not in its absence. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, an acknowledgement of something that had been growing since that first meeting at the station wall. The moment was interrupted by Miguel calling from the kitchen that supper was ready. You should eat, Willa said, suddenly flustered, to regain your strength. Will you join me? Quincy asked. I'm not sure I can make it to the table yet. So they shared a simple meal in his room, talking of ordinary things, the condition of the cattle, the vegetable garden's progress, a book Quincy had been reading before his injury. It was comfortable, this quiet domesticity, and Willa found herself thinking how natural it felt to be there with him. Over the next week, Quincy recovered steadily, though he chafed at the restrictions Willa placed on his activities. She allowed him to move to the porch after 3 days, where he could at least observe the ranch operations and give directions to his men. You're a hard taskmaster, Miss Hayes, he grumbled good-naturedly as she changed his bandages one evening. Would you prefer I let you tear open your wound and develop fever again? She asked archly. No, madam, he replied with mock meekness. Though I do wish you'd call me Quincy. After saving my life, I think we're past formalities. Willa's hands stilled on the bandage. Very well, Quincy, and you should call me Willa. Willa, he repeated, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. It suits you better than Wilhelmina, less formal, more real. Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away immediately. Willa was suddenly acutely aware of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingertips, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way the setting sun caught gold highlights in his brown hair. The moment was broken by the distant sound of riders approaching, several horses moving at a steady pace. Quincy tensed, reaching for the rifle that was never far from his side these days. Get inside, he ordered, all softness gone from his voice. But as the riders came into view, Willa could see they were soldiers, a cavalry patrol led by none other than Captain Lewis, his arm in a sling but otherwise recovered from his wounds. Reed, the captain called as they drew near. Thought you might like to know it's over. Black Knife and his band crossed into Mexico yesterday, armies not pursuing. Relief washed over Quincy's face. Any more casualties? None on our side. Can't say the same for them. The captain dismounted stiffly. Mind if we water our horses before heading back to the fort? Of course not. Willa, would you mind getting these men some coffee? As Willa bustled about the kitchen, she could hear the men talking on the porch discussing the Apache, the drought that had driven them to raiding, the politics of the reservation system. It was a complex situation with no easy answers, and she admired the thoughtful way Quincy contributed to the conversation, never simplifying or demonizing either side. When the soldiers departed, the ranch seemed to exhale collectively. The constant tension of the past week dissipated, leaving a peaceful quiet in its wake. That evening, Quincy asked Willa to join him on the porch after supper. The night was clear, with a three-quarter moon casting silver light across the ranch yard and a blanket of stars overhead unlike anything Willa had ever seen in Boston. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Quincy said, following her gaze upward. "Breathtaking," she agreed. "I never knew there were so many stars." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the occasional hoot of an owl, the soft nickering of horses in the corral. Finally, Quincy spoke. "Willa, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "Yes." "Your position here, as housekeeper, it was meant to be temporary until you decided what you wanted to do." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "It's been nearly a month now. Have you given any thought to your future plans?" The question caught her off guard. In truth, she had been so caught up in ranch life that she'd given little thought to what might come next. I haven't really," she admitted. "I suppose I should be making arrangements to return east or perhaps seek a position in a larger town." Quincy nodded slowly, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "If that's what you want, I'll help in any way I can, but, Willa prompted when he fell silent. "But I've grown accustomed to your presence here," he said, the words coming more quickly now. "The house feels like a home again, not just a place to sleep between workdays. The men are happier, better fed, everything runs more smoothly." "I'm glad I've been useful," Willa said carefully, uncertain where this was leading. "It's more than that," Quincy said, turning to face her directly. "You've brought life back to this place, back to me." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that I'd like you to stay, not as a housekeeper, but as—" He faltered, and Willa felt her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he must hear it. "As what, Quincy?" she asked softly. "As my wife," he said simply. "If you'd consider it. I know it's sudden and I'm not offering the kind of life you were accustomed to in Boston, but I think we could build something good together, something real." Willa was silent, too overwhelmed to speak immediately. It was sudden. Yes, they'd known each other barely a month. Yet in that time they'd faced danger together, shared confidences, developed a respect and understanding that many longer acquaintances lacked. And there was something else, a warmth that spread through her whenever he was near, a sense of rightness she'd never felt with Thomas or any other suitor in Boston. "I understand if you need time to think about it," Quincy said, misinterpreting her silence. "Or if your answer is no." "I wouldn't hold you to yes," Willa interrupted, her voice clear and certain. Quincy stared at her. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife." A smile spread across her face, reflecting the joy suddenly bubbling up inside her. "This place does feel like home now." "You feel like home, Quincy?" His face transformed with a smile that erased years from his features. Slowly, as if giving her time to withdraw, he reached for her hand. When she gave it willingly, he raised it to his lips in a gesture both old-fashioned and deeply touching. "I'll do my best to make you happy, Willa Hayes," he promised. "Every day." "I believe you will," she said, "as I will try to do the same for you." Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church in Cottonwood Springs. The entire town turned out for the occasion, curious to witness the union of the reclusive rancher and the Boston lady who had arrived crying at the station wall such a short time ago. Mrs. Thornton had helped Willa remake one of Sarah's better dresses into a wedding gown of creamy muslin with lace trim. Miguel's wife had contributed a veil, and the schoolteacher had gathered wildflowers for a bouquet. Sheriff Dawson gave the bride away, and Billy served as best man, beaming with pride at being chosen for the honor. Even Captain Lewis attended, resplendent in his dress uniform, representing the Army's respect for Quincy. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was music and dancing, and more food than Willa had ever seen in one place. Contributions from every family in the area, a testament to the community's acceptance of her. As the evening deepened, Quincy found Willa sitting on the porch step, taking a moment's rest from the festivities. "Happy, Mrs. Reed?" he asked, settling beside her. "Very," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I still can't believe how much my life has changed in such a short time. 2 months ago, I was in Boston, preparing to marry a man I'd known all my life but never truly understood." "Fate has strange ways," Quincy agreed. "When I saw you crying by that station wall, I never imagined you'd become my wife. I just knew you needed help and I could provide it." "Your journey ends with me," Willa quoted softly. "That's what you said to me that day." "And I meant it," Quincy said, taking her hand, though I didn't know then exactly how true those words would become. As the celebration continued around them, Willa reflected on the circuitous path that had led her to this moment. Thomas's betrayal, which had seemed a devastating blow, had in fact freed her to find a love and a life far more suited to the woman she truly was. Not the proper Boston lady she'd been raised to be, but someone stronger, more resilient, more alive. The years that followed brought their share of challenges: drought seasons that threatened the cattle, winters harsh enough to test the sturdiest ranch house, occasional tensions with neighboring ranchers over water rights or grazing boundaries. But through it all, the bond between Quincy and Willa only strengthened. Their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after Quincy's first wife, was born a year after their wedding, a healthy, strong, lunged girl with her father's determined chin and her mother's thoughtful eyes. 2 years later came James, a quiet boy who showed an early affinity for horses that delighted Miguel. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Willa's Eastern education proved unexpectedly valuable in keeping meticulous records and conducting business correspondence, while Quincy's practical knowledge of the land and animals ensured the ranch's reputation for quality cattle continued to grow. They added rooms to the house as the family expanded, planted more trees along the creek, and established a small school on the property where the ranch children and those from neighboring spreads could learn their letters and numbers under Willa's patient guidance. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Quincy surprised Willa with a special gift: a small wooden plaque to hang beside the front door. Carved into it were the words that had brought them together: "Your journey ends with me." "To remind us both," he said as she traced the letters with her fingertips, "that endings can also be beginnings." Willa looked around at the home they had built together, at their children playing in the yard, at the thriving ranch that supported not just their family but several others, at the man who had transformed from stranger to the center of her world, and knew with absolute certainty that her journey had ended exactly where it was meant to. "I wouldn't change a single step of the path that led me here," she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. Not even the tears at the station wall. Quincy's arms encircled her, strong and secure as they had been from the first day. "Nor would I," he agreed. "Every trail I've followed led me to you, and that makes even the hardest parts worthwhile." As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they stood together on the porch of the home they'd created, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, the perfect ending to a journey neither had anticipated, but both now treasured above all else.